From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. K-State's Romulo Lollato will be along to look at the hard freeze that settled over Kansas late last week and what K-State's crop and weather models are saying about the possibility of freeze damage to the winter wheat crop. He'll go over the symptoms of damage that you growers should be watching for. Then from the K-State College of Agriculture, Marty Draper will talk about the impact of COVID-19 on agricultural research activities at the university. Also, Kansas Secretary of Agriculture Mike Beam will be along to talk about what the Kansas Department of Agriculture has undertaken as part of the state's response to coronavirus. And with this week's Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven, right here on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
This is the K-State Radio Network, our midweek edition of Agriculture Today. The winter wheat crop in Kansas drawing attention, especially when we think back to late last week when quite cold temperatures settled in, bringing freezing conditions to a pretty large chunk of Kansas. What is the resulting injury, if any, to winter wheat from that cold spell? Romulo Lollato is along with us via phone. Romulo, as you know, is a wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. So, Romulo, your general observations on what has happened to winter wheat in Kansas as to the damage potentially to the crop?
Hi, Eric. And this is a topic that seems like every year we have some concerns with. Sometimes those concerns turn out to be true and we have some damage to the crop. Other times, it's just a concern, and hopefully that's what happened so far to the crop as well. So can we say anything with certainty? Well, we can't for sure at the moment, but hopefully here in about a week or 10 days, we should be able to start seeing some damage if we had any. So what we can do at the moment is consider the things that can lead to a higher risk of freeze damage versus those that perhaps could help the crop make through that cold spell. And
there are principally two factors that determine that freeze damage potential, you say.
Yeah, so there are two main factors, right? One of them is how cold did it get and for how long temperatures were below given threshold, below which the crop can suffer damage, right? And the second factor is what's the growth stage of that crop. And the reason the second factor is important is because winter wheat can be quite tolerant to cold temperatures at given developmental stages. As the crop progresses from tillering through jointing, through the second node, through antithesis, and so on, it becomes more and more susceptible to cold injury. So the threshold temperature that it can handle, it increases, right? So it cannot handle as cold temperature. So first thing that we need to ask ourselves are those two things. What are the minimum temperatures achieved and for how long we had those cold temperatures? And two, how does that match the growth stage of the crop?
And for the first point, that is, how cold did it get? You always rely heavily on the information out of the Weather Data Library at K-State. And what is it telling us about the event of late last week?
Definitely. So we work with the Kansas Mesonet very closely, and actually they're crucial in helping us with both pieces of this equation here. The first one telling us how cold it got, but the second one as well, we have some models that rely on temperature to tell us what's the growth stage of the wheat or the approximate growth stage. So the first part, right, how cold did it get, for how long was it cold? Really throughout the state, it depended. So that April 3rd had a minimum air temperature that ranged anywhere from 16 Fahrenheit on the northwest corner of the state, Colby and northwest of Colby, all the way to 36 Fahrenheit in the southeast corner of the state. So there was a very wide range in minimum temperatures, with the northwest getting much colder than what we saw in the southeast. So we kind of had that transect falling. And at this point in time, we ask ourselves how many hours were temperatures below 24 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason, we're going to get to the reason of that 24, right? But that's an important threshold during this time of the year for wheat that is jointed. And overall, if we look at south central Kansas, parts of southwest Kansas, and the eastern third of the state, essentially we almost didn't have any hours, or we had 0 hours below that 24, because in that region of the state we got to perhaps 25, 26, all the way to about 36 Fahrenheit. Then as we go to north central Kansas and northwest Kansas, where we saw the coldest temperatures, then we had as much as 20 hours below that 24 Fahrenheit. And this brings us to the second question, which is what's the approximate development of the crop, or what was the development of the crop when we had that freeze injury. And Eric DeWolf and I, we have been for the last 5 years or so developing a model based on temperature, accumulated temperature from January, that has been very good in predicting different growth stages of the crop. Based on that, the estimated growth stage of the crop around the state, the furthest along would be around jointing back then, right, last Friday, and that would have been the south central part of the state and southeast part of the state. And for the crop that is jointed, that 24 degrees is very important. So that's why we're looking at the 24. We said, okay, what's the furthest along crop that we have in the state? It's about jointing. How many hours can it handle below 24? It's up to about a couple of hours or so. Now, the model is telling us that the majority of the fields are about jointed. It doesn't mean that we don't have fields that are further along than that. Mm-hmm. So for sure, we would have fields that got planted early, for example, or that got planted to an early variety, or there were conventional tillage, and so a little bit more temperature in the soil, that would have been further along. I'm sure that a few fields in south central Kansas could have been at that second node stage, which then would be perhaps even a little bit more sensitive. Maybe 24 is not a good indicative there anymore. Maybe we need 26, 27, right? Mm-hmm. So the further along the crop is, the more sensitive it is. But remember, for this type of coarse type of analysis that we're doing, it's not a field-specific analysis, more of a coarse regional analysis. The majority of the fields should have been at about jointing in the south central part of the state. So for those fields that were jointing, we didn't have temperatures in that region that were too low, in the low 20s, right? So perhaps a more restricted risk of yield loss there. Another region that I am a little bit concerned is central Kansas. There are fields that were already jointing there, and that region of the state actually got more hours below 24, got anywhere from 5 all the way to 10 or 12 hours below 24. In that case, the fields that were further along, they could definitely sustain some level of damage.
And then if you go further west where the coldest temperatures were in place for the longest time, well, the crop was not advanced as much as it is clearly in central and in southeast Kansas. So perhaps those stands out there escaped damage?
That's what we're hoping for. Just to give the listener here a perspective of whenever the crop is still tillering, which a lot of that northwest crop was still tillering by last Friday, it can handle up to about 12 Fahrenheit, typically without much risk of damage, and we didn't get below 16 on that part of the state, right? So, again, there is a risk for fields that were further along. So say that fields that got planted early after a long fallow period there in the northwest. But for the most part, our models are all indicating that fields there should have been about tillering or so. So, again, with the majority of the crop, not overly concerned. With those more advanced fields, perhaps we could see some damage.
So in the cases, Romulo, where a field might be on that borderline for damage, what should a producer be looking for with respect to injury symptoms as they scout their fields here in the coming days?
So I guess the most important thing is that for about a week after that freeze damage, we typically don't go out and don't try to look for much because typically that's not how long it will take. But first, color of leaves, right? If we have any leaves burned back, which we're probably going to have, later on, we can start looking for the new leaves, right? So take a look at the new leaves that are just coming out and emerging. If they're nice and green, then that probably indicates that that tiller is still alive. They're coming out of the world. They're already yellow. Probably going to indicate that that tiller is dead. So the color of those new leaves will be important in a few days, right? Probably wait a good 10 days from the freeze event until looking for these. For fields that were further along, right, that were perhaps already jointed or even further along than that, second node or so, we want to look for the color of the developing head, right, or the growing point. Very simple. I would say go to a low-lying area of the field where it's going to be more exposed to those cold temperatures. Get a few of the plants there, look for that main stem, split it open lengthwise, and look for the developing head. If it's a nice and green and turgid, crispy developing head, that's a good sign. If it's kind of wilted and mushy and kind of white and sometimes even turning light brown, it's a bad sign. It means that it has died. Now, don't look only for those primary tillers. Take a look at the late tillers as well. Take a look at the secondary tillers as they would have been behind, a few days behind in development. So sometimes we lost the main tiller, but those other tillers are still around, and they could definitely help the crop make up for any potential yield loss from those primary tillers.
There's a great article that covers all of this in good detail in the latest Agronomy E-Update newsletter out of K-State. It was posted this past Friday, April the 3rd. Agronomy.ksu.edu is what you want to look for there. Romulo, thank you for your time right here. Take care. We'll catch up with you again soon.
Thank you, Eric.
He's Romulo Lollato, a wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Agriculture Today will return after this over the K-State Radio Network.
A social distancing tip.
Keeping your distance from others is important in slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are some fun things to do alone. Read a book, take a walk, unpack your suitcase from that trip you took last September, paint a self-portrait, catch up on a TV series, do a puzzle. Remember, we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone-together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Agriculture Today continues now. Well, COVID-19, as we all understand, has disrupted things endless ways. And one of those that comes to mind here with regard to K-State's College of Agriculture is how all of the COVID-19 scenarios have impacted ongoing and perhaps future agricultural research out of the university. We've connected now with the Associate Dean and Director for Research, K-State's College of Agriculture, Marty Draper, now with us. And there's such a volume of research that K-State engages in, College of Agriculture, here on campus and around the state. So as the COVID-19 situation has unfurled, Marty, there's been quite a bit of adaptation and adjustment going on.
Well, you know, Eric, I think it's really important, as you mentioned, about the research arm of the university. I think often a university is looked at first as a place where classes are taught, but being a land grant, the research and extension missions are very important in what we do. And there's such a high volume of research in the College of Ag and K-State Research and Extension. But then across campus, it's really magnified. So when you look at the total impact, it's far beyond Ag. Ag has the largest research footprint on campus, followed by arts and sciences, engineering, vet med, and health and human sciences. But when we look at Ag and KSRE alone, we see that the expected crops and livestock research is there that we would always anticipate. But you have to look deeper to recognize that crops and livestock includes genetics and genetic improvement and nutrition and feed efficiency and physiology and reproduction and yield, pest management and end-use quality. I'm sure I'm missing all kinds of aspects that broaden the picture even more. But you also have to consider that the production research that's conducted is really all aimed at improving profitability. Beyond the production work, There's basic research occurring that provides the foundation for some of the applied advances that will come in 3, maybe 5, maybe 10 or 20 years down the road. So if we don't do that research, our advances in production and profitability, our incremental progress will be too slow to keep up with the demands of a growing population and a growing economy. So let's say we are learning more about how perhaps diet influences physiological processes that drive weight gain or carcass quality in beef cattle. It might take several years to be able to apply the principles of genetics to deliver that trait to the producer. We might find that the mechanisms are completely different in dairy cattle. Every species is unique. And so that basic research is critical. And that basic research and the applied research is really being impacted by the disruptions due to COVID-19.
So it's quite obvious that sustaining this work, keeping it moving forward, is of the utmost in securing our food production. And so then how has the current pandemic affected those operations to some extent, surely?
Well, sure. So when you take a look at our pandemic operations, we have really minimized our research to limit personal interactions and maximize social distancing. In fact, I would say that we should maybe think of this as physical distancing instead of social distancing.
Right.
Socializing is not what we're after. But in social situations where we're near one another, we want buffer zones. We want to make sure that we've got at least that 6-foot space. And when you can't do that in a busy lab. So we've asked labs to determine if they can pause operations. We're referring to that as hibernation. If so, we want them to please do that. And buildings are minimally staffed with a fraction of the active research labs operating. But that, I really want to emphasize, that does not mean that we are shut down. That does not mean that we're not doing anything. As I've tried to emphasize to our faculty and graduate students, this is a time to focus on some of the elements of their projects that often get relegated to their spare time, writing scientific manuscripts, reporting on research, data analysis, all the things that you don't need to be doing from the lab. That work is really being done from home. We're minimizing starts to new experiments, especially if they can be generated in a relatively short time or they're not date dependent. But we also have exceptions. So in the College of Ag, we work with living systems. We work with seasonal and cyclic processes. So we're concerned about living collections, stored samples, irreplaceable germplasm, and animal welfare. We're not neglecting those responsibilities. We're progressing with planting spring crops and animal research that's tied to specific dates. But we're also not prolonging studies beyond completion dates. We're trying to minimize the amount of time that people have an opportunity or are actually required to interact with one another. So all of what we're doing is being done with social distancing and social hygiene in mind. So when I talk about social hygiene, it's beyond social distancing. It's thinking about wearing those masks. It's thinking about washing your hands frequently. It's washing surfaces and sanitizing things as frequently as possible. But all of our projects are being reassessed on a weekly basis, and we're really looking for the optimal approach to keeping people safe.
As you're alluding, though, agricultural research by its very nature is overwhelmingly hands-on. You think feeding trials, you think crop plots, all of these things that need to have warm bodies around them to make them tick. So are you seeing creative solutions on the part of the researchers at K-State to perpetuate those research projects?
You know, as we say creative, and we're really talking about how we bend the rules, we're not trying to bend the rules, but creative is a challenge within the constructs of social distancing. We're using, for example, multiple cars to get people to study sites because it's really hard to get a 6-foot social distance when you've got a load of people that you need to haul to the field to plant a year's worth of, let's say, soybean trials. We're using multiple cars to get to study sites. We're scheduling the use of shared resources, and we're sharing labor across projects. Losing the students from campus has really been a tough blow. When we sent students home and said we're going to teach everything online, it really impacted our workforce. So the completion of certain projects are really dependent on having hands to do that. Harvesting livestock, harvesting carcasses in the animal science department is one of those examples, but certainly planting is another one. So we've really had to find ways to work around those constraints. And So let's just say that there have been challenges, and every day as we recognize those challenges, we're trying to find new solutions and new workarounds so that we can continue to do the things that we really consider to be mission critical.
Well, Marty, something that should not be overlooked here, K-State Research and Extension works with researchers not only here within the confines of the university and its locations around the state, but most assuredly working with fellow scientists abroad conducting research. There are current travel restrictions for, K-State employees and the public at large to a certain extent. So what is being done to ensure that research isn't compromised, the international research side?
Well, sometimes when we hear about the university's involvement in international research, we are criticized that we're focusing resources outside of Kansas, but really all of that research is multi-purpose, and we find a tremendous benefit from it. So when we look at some of the things that we're doing, if you consider that travel is probably one of the biggest things that we're going to be dealing with when we're looking at trying to address international projects. We've had at least one project where we've had to reschedule a trip to Africa to work on a project over there. But we've also got students and postdocs that are stranded in their home countries. We've had the inability to deliver some of those planned programs abroad. We've got a bunch of issues. And so some of what we're learning here and applying in the developing world actually teaches us some things about how we can do business better in the U.S. as well.
Well, Marty, at the end of the day, whenever that end comes, and nobody is confident in foretelling that at this moment, how do you think K-State's agricultural research efforts emerge from this? This has been a significant interruption, but will likely things move forward on a productive keel in the aftermath?
Yeah, I think the biggest question is the timeline. We know we're going to get through this, but we also know that research is going to be set back. We know that there's going to be costs incurred and there's going to be results that are going to be delayed. So we're going to continue to be looking at each project and try and find the best outcomes for each of those. Ultimately, what we're concerned is with the best outcome for the researcher, which is probably going to be the best outcome for K-State, and ultimately the best outcome for the people of Kansas. There's a great deal of concern about the additional costs that are going to be incurred, and we're very hopeful that some of the relief bills that have been passed through Congress are going to be able to provide some of the impact that we need to be able to weather this storm. But I would say that we are a ways from being able to plot what the way out of this is going to look like. But in the next weeks and potentially the next few months, we should have a much better picture of what that's going to look like.
In the meantime, hats off to your research troops, for even as we speak, they are developing ideas and approaches to try to further their work as much as is possible under the circumstances. So we do appreciate you taking a few moments and updating us on what's happening with agricultural research at Kansas State University amid the coronavirus pandemic. Take care, Marty. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to be here, Eric. Thank you.
He is the Associate Dean and Director for Research for K-State's College of Agriculture, is Marty Draper. Agriculture Today will be back after this break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson with you. We're going to take a look now at the state of agriculture weeks deep now into COVID-19 and all of its ramifications pertaining to Kansas agriculture directly now. Aboard with us is the Kansas Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Beam, to give us insight and perspective on what's going on right now. Mike, this is clearly, as the Secretary, at the top of your agenda right now, the impacts of COVID-19 on our state's leading industry.
Well, it is front and center. And I often tell people that I don't know if there's anybody really that can escape this, because it's changing the lives of everyone. But the state of agriculture is impacted as much as anybody at this time.
As you would assess that impact, where is it being felt the most, and in what fashion, do you think?
Well, I would say it's just the market impact. You know, agriculture and the various sectors that make up agriculture in Kansas, you know, it's a $47 billion industry. And we're the fifth largest state when it comes to the value of agricultural marketing. But if you look at commodity prices and prices for our products, it's down, 20 to 35%. And they weren't very good strength to begin with. So that uncertainty, I think, is the most immediate impact, and the unknown. Some of these commodities, of course, are there yet to be harvested, or there's some flexibility in the marketing. But, the day-to-day products, whether it be, beef, cattle, other livestock, and dairy products, those products have to move on a daily basis, have to be marketed on a daily basis. So, and the inability for people to forward contract or hedge at a level that's even close to break even is pretty scary at this point. Probably the difficulty is, as people have tried to get groceries, people are eating at home now, and they see if it's available, and sometimes some of these products are not available. And if it is, it's rationed out. But yet they see, the farm price, and that is very perplexing. And I know there'll be a lot of look into this when it's over, but a lot of it's just a supply chain stress. I mean, depending on the commodity, we're looking at probably 30 to 40% of these products typically go to food service. So if your restaurant and food service industries are shut down or severely limited, that's a huge impact. And so that product, trying to reroute that product directly to consumers takes some time, and is probably the most difficult thing to understand and grasp.
Can a government entity such as the KDA assist with smoothing those pathways of product flow at all? Are there any mechanisms that will allow for that?
Well, there's probably some small things that can be done. The one thing that came up here a couple of weeks ago is, as these restaurants and food service entities started shutting down, if they were unable to provide, takeout or delivery, they're sitting there with a lot of product that they had purchased. And so, the department licenses basically all food service entities. So we sat down and looked at a way that those folks could resell or move that product either directly to consumers or other retailers, such as grocery stores. So we issued guidance a couple of weeks ago to those folks so they could at least move that product, maybe capture some value, and help address the lack of supply at the retail level. So that's one small example. Another thing we've spent a lot of time on is we have a presence at the State Emergency Operations Center at the Kansas Division of Emergency Management, and they have multiple calls every day, and they're hearing from local officials all across the state. And so you can only imagine the type of questions that surface about, what is agriculture's essential function? What about restaurants, soda fountain accessibility at convenience stores, pets, pet shelters, pet grooming, veterinary services, auction markets, just a whole host of questions. So we're working with the state officials to try to continually provide guidance and clarification and update those as we learn more information and go through the process.
With the hope that you can sustain those functions as essential in the framework of agriculture's day-to-day operations.
Absolutely. I've told some folks that from the agricultural standpoint, the production of food, fiber, and fuel, we're still in business. It's still an essential function, but we emphasize it's not business as usual. We need to operate within only those activities that are essential and continuing the social distancing and stay at home when those functions aren't being carried out. So it's, still putting the seed in the ground, still turning cattle out, still working cattle, still, we have a lot of farmers markets. We have farmers who produce, produce that go directly to consumers. They're still in business, but in all cases, we still operate just a little differently because of the social guidelines and the stay-home order.
One last thing here, Mike, and that is, and you alluded to it, rural residents still need to be vigilant about the potential spread of COVID-19. Social distancing is rather built in by the nature of farming and ranching to a certain degree, but you would like to see our rural dwellers, farmers, ranchers, and the like do their part to suppress this disease?
I would. I think we're finding out that human nature is, most people have a social need, have an interaction, even those in the remote areas. But we're in about the third week here of trying to really exercise that and stop that spread. That's only going to pay dividends. It's going to save lives. And the more social distancing and the more stay at home that we do now, actually the sooner we'll be able to get back to a normal. So that's it's important. There is cases in over half the counties of Kansas. So we know it's out there in most places, and we just need to be very vigilant in minimizing the chance of spreading it.
Well, a tip of the cap, Mike, to you and your team for continuing forward with your responsibilities toward Kansas agriculture. Thank you for the update right here. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
He's the Kansas Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Beam. And this is Agriculture Today. More coming your way shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
Apparently, it did not do any good to the suffering criminal.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Presently, here on the hill, the celery pear is blooming. Without the strong south wind, the white blooms will hang on. But when the wind blows, it's a brief but colorful show. I also see the red buds are showing color. They have a purple haze about them, ready to burst into bloom. Of course, forsythia has been blooming, and their yellow flowers cheer up the yard. I'm glad to see that at these crazy times, nature goes through its seasons. Plants are starting to leave out. Of course, the daffodils have been blooming quite a while. By planting the early, mid-season, and the late bulbs, the time of bloom is extended. I also have a patch of hyacinths, which keep coming back year after year. If you pick a bloom, they are smaller now and start to revert back to the wildlings, a very small flower. The deep blue color is still deep blue, but the flower is smaller. And the hyacinth scent is just as strong. Walking the yard and hill, I look for these signs of spring and hope. The other day, I noticed the first carpenter bee hanging around where they are drilling into the house. That upset me. I wish the bees would be carpeting somewhere else. They love to work in front and above, my sliding doors of my study. That way I see them swirl and dance, come and go. I've done many things, if not everything, to discourage them. But when I look at them, I find them beautiful, and they don't sting. At least, I've never been stung. What I really have enjoyed this year is the big and expanding beds of the Vinca minor, ground cover, under the cedar trees. Each year the patches are getting bigger. At some places, the creeping vines are reaching into the lawn now. It's fine. The mower is set high, and I will mow over it. But right now, the shining green leaves are offset by the deep blue flowers. And there are masses of flowers. It's blue on green, and just beautiful. I have 3 patches, large patches, here near the house. They grow under the cedars we planted as tiny trees. They are trees we dug up in a pasture of a friend of mine just outside of town. Those small trees are now tall with sturdy trunks. Their lower branches all dead and dry, creating an open, clean view to the ground cover. It's amazing how the Vinca has grown. I started off with 1 tray a nurseryman friend gave me. Try them, he said. And that was more than 40 years ago. And I've not been disappointed. Vinca minor, also called common periwinkle, is a native from Europe. But it is so common that people think it's a native here. I can understand that, as I have a large patch on the farm growing in a wooded dell. I do not remember planting it there. I would not know why I would have done that. But there it is also growing, strong and spreading. Ground covers are low-growing plants, which, with a minimum amount of care, can take the place of lawn grasses. But as Donald Wyman in his book Ground Cover Plants states, it should be understood that of the many different ground covers, well-maintained grass is certainly the neatest, and in many ways the most satisfactory of them all. Okay, dear Donald, I respectfully disagree. I would say this: with regular mowing, a riding mower is the easiest tool to take care of grass and maintain or even create a lawn. But my big beds of flowering Vinca minor with the beautiful blue flowers are a sight to behold. Of course, to get this show took close to 40 years. And a good lawn can be grown in a much shorter time. If everything is done right, one can have a lawn in one season, sown in the fall, and a green lawn the next spring or summer. The one invasion I have in my beds of Vinca here near the house is the pesky honeysuckle. I mow them short twice a year. It's the Tartarian honeysuckle, a pest. I use the weed mower, and it takes me an hour. Once done, it's like a clean shave. Some interesting facts of Vinca minor. During the Middle Ages, the heads of criminals to be executed were adorned with stems of periwinkle. The Italians called it the flower of death. It was thought to repel witches and evil spirits. As an herb, it is said to reduce blood pressure or stop bleeding. Apparently, it didn't do any good to the suffering criminal.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. Our time's away for this Wednesday edition. Before we go, though, want to let you know that K-State Research and Extension has put together a very useful web page on COVID-19 to help you navigate through this challenging situation. The subject matter expertise of K-State Research and Extension specialists is accessible right there addressing numerous aspects of life that have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. This page a direct link to resources ripe for the times on agriculture, business, children's education, family, food safety, nutrition, health and wellness, and safety. You can get to that COVID-19 informational page by going to ksre.ksu.edu. Again, ksre.ksu.edu. Make use of that good information out of K-State as you see fit. In the meantime, we appreciate you being along with us today and welcome you right back here this same time tomorrow. A good day to you and stay safe. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.